Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, 2014 CTI Sneak Peek. My name is Benjamin White with the SANS Institute, and I'll be moderating this webcast. Today's featured speaker is Mike Cloppert, Lead Analyst for Lockheed Martin. During the presentation, if you have any questions for Mike, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the webcast and throughout the webcast. At this point, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Mike.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everybody. As Ben said, my name is Mike Cloppert. I'm the Chief Research Analyst for Lockheed Martin's Computer Incident Response Team, charged with the computer network defense of all of our unclassified assets worldwide. I am giving you a quick presentation today to hopefully whet your appetite for the upcoming 2014 Cyber Threat Intelligence Summit. It will be the second annual summit that we've had. This time we are going for 2 days. In February, we'll talk about that towards the end. Really what I wanted to do is give everyone an idea of what sort of discussions are going to be had at the conference simply by example, and just get everyone thinking a little bit more about cyber threat intelligence and hopefully give some information that will help answer one of the most common questions, which is, okay, I've got this threat intel feed. What do I do with it? I've got all this data. How do I manage it? How do I, exploit it for furtherance of computer network defense at my organization? And for those of you who registered for the for this presentation last week, I apologize that we weren't able to work it out, but thank you for joining us this week. And I'm going to be fielding questions as they arise throughout the course of this presentation, and then at the end, we'll have probably 10 or 15 minutes for open Q&A about anything CTI related that you might have.
Hey, Mike, I think you might have put yourself on mute just now.
Oh, check. There? Am I there?
Yep, loud and clear.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Great, thank you. Sorry, I appear to have had a slight snafu here with the mic control panel. All right, so today we are going to kind of level set what we mean when we say cyber threat intelligence. A lot of people have a lot of different definitions. I don't think that there's one that's necessarily correct or incorrect. It's whatever works, for you and your organization. But just so that everyone understands what I'm talking about when I say CTI, we'll talk about that. Where you can get this threat intel, how we can use and vet that cyber threat intelligence, deciphering what your potential courses of action are once you have this intelligence, understanding intelligence gain loss. So there are different things that you can do, options that you can take with certain types of intelligence that will maybe protect you but not allow you to collect further intelligence and things of that nature. Give a couple of examples of good and bad cyber threat intel. I'll talk briefly also about frameworks for leveraging cyber threat intelligence. So in other words, what sort of tools are you going to be using to deploy this intelligence? I'll go briefly over some of the things that are exciting me about the 2014 CTI Summit, and then of course Q&A. So cyber threat intelligence is intelligence on adversaries that describes some sort of offensive cyber operation that is actionable for network defenders. I say here CNA. This is a little bit of military intelligence community parlance that I think is probably apropos for CTI. CNE is computer network exploitation. and CNA is computer network attack. The distinction there being essentially whether or not the activity in question is an attempt to compromise availability of computing resources in the case of CNA, computer network attack, or the confidentiality and integrity of data, which would be computer network exploitation, CNE. And we use, of course, to counter that, computer network defense. Now, some in the military intelligence community will point out that this is actually counterintelligence. Yes, it is. It is intelligence about adversaries is actually counterintelligence if you were talking about the capabilities and operations of your adversary, right? But the problem is we've already coined it as cyber threat intelligence, so we're just going to go with it. And by the way, the actionable component there, if you are a SIGINT or signals interception type of organization, think NSA and the sort, the intelligence that you are discussing may not necessarily be actionable or be actionable in, we'll just say, different ways than network defenders are able to act on the intelligence. Okay, so we've got that. Now, in order to be actionable, so in order to make CTI something that we can use, it must have a few properties, right? One is the action that you can take with the intelligence must be, of course, within the legal limits of your computer network defense organization. Certainly, if you understand IP addresses, for example, infrastructure that an adversary is operating from, you know, you quickly go into legal gray area when you talk about going out and interacting with those that infrastructure, depending on what you might do, right? Intelligence is objective and unambiguous. So, you know, the important part for us to utilize CTI is that it must describe something concrete, right? An IP address is very specific. It's very objective. It's unambiguous, right? And that's really what I mean there. Indicators are properly contextualized. So if you get some intelligence about potentially an adversary, and all it does is describe, you know, maybe an email address or an IP address, and that alone is what you have, and that's not very useful to you, because there's a lot of different things that can be indicated by an indicator, right? By a piece of intelligence. And so what we the most commonly accepted contextual information that we consider to be useful is how these indicators are contextualized within the kill chain and as a component of the diamond model. Now, the diamond model is something that's fairly new in terms of its public face here. It's a model that has been discussed inside inner circles of the DoD and intelligence community for a number of years now. A couple of good colleagues of mine are kind of the brainchildren behind the diamond model, and this is something that will be discussed in depth by one of those guys at our CTI summit. I will touch on it briefly here, simply so as to explain what I'm talking about in a couple of slides, but that's one of the presentations that I am in particular really looking forward to finally having its day in kind of the public discourse, and so that we can all begin embracing it and seeing how it helps us, how it helps illuminate further cyber threat intelligence, what we can do with it, and how we can better defend ourselves with it. So reeling it back in a little bit, in order to be actionable, technology must exist to leverage a course of action upon observation of an indicator of an IP address, email address, etc., so on and so forth. This technological capability, of course, is going to vary by organization, and you know, there are COTS tools out there that can you know, assist with this. There are a lot of you know, customized and highly specific tools out there that can help with this. But you know, the vantage point of that technology is also important. So not only can you do it, but you know, if you're looking for something, are you looking in all of the places that that piece of intelligence, that indicator, may reside? So that's really what we mean by actionable. All of those things must be in place. So Where do we get cyber threat intelligence? Well, at Lockheed Martin, we like to break this down into two buckets: detected by us and reported to us. So this is kind of a binary universe of intelligence sources from our perspective, and I think it fits very well because the two types of intelligence are very different. You'll begin to see as you operate with CTI more and more. These two notions of where the information comes from play a large role in how, I guess, how much you can utilize the intelligence and how easily you can deploy it. And I'll go into that in a little bit here. So detected bias is essentially the fruits of your analytical labor, right? You have a past intrusion that you're analyzing, and you detect maybe in the delivery stage of the kill chain, and you analyze what had happened in the reconnaissance and weaponization stages, and you pull out some indicators there. Well, that's new. Those new indicators are new intelligence that's detected by us, even though we didn't really detect it as it happened. And then, of course, synthesizing the rest of the intrusion. So taking out the, let's say it's an email with a Trojanized document, kind of the canonical example here. Grabbing that email, pulling out the Trojanized document, analyzing it for its characteristics, identifying unique characteristics of that, reverse engineering the command and control protocol that gets invoked on a victim system, the footprint on the system for the installation phase, etc. So even though you detect this, and maybe you even mitigate it at delivery stage, you obviously have a lot of work to do because there's a lot of potential intelligence there that you can exploit to enhance your defenses. Detected by us is all of that intelligence that is generated from that effort. And then reported to us is pretty self-explanatory. There are a couple of potential sources for that. Trusted individuals or back channels. This is kind of an underappreciated source of intelligence that has been critical throughout the many years that I've been doing this. Formal corporate agreements and things of that nature are what they are, and they're great. But sometimes what it takes in crisis mode is one person trusting another and being willing to share information that is to make a huge impact in how an organization defends itself and responds to an impending threat. The government, of course, there are plenty of stories of people who have had the FBI knock at their door, and then suddenly they're calling, around to see who can help them out. Information sharing industry groups, and finally, of course, commercial threat intel feeds. Those sources may be in a particular order or may not. I'll let you be the judge of that. So, using and vetting cyber threat intel. So you've got this threat feed, right? You've got all this information that is being generated by your analysts internally, for detected by us, and then reported to us, through your various sources of external intelligence. And how do we use this? How do we vet the good from the bad and take what might be bad and make it better so that we can utilize it? Well, in order to use CTI, one must know a number of things about it. All right. First, besides what it is itself, what the value is, right? IP address, email address, something of that nature. You also need to understand the nature of the corresponding threat. So is this, and so I'll go into each of these in a little bit more detail, actually. So the nature of the corresponding threat, meaning of the matched activity. So what is it describing, right? Viability for detection and correlation. So is this something that's useful for each one of those particular actions that your analysts are going to be involved in? And then finally, what is the optimal deployment method for either mitigation or analysis? Now keep in mind, when I say mitigation, detection is a mitigation in the sense that it drives your incident response process in that race condition against the adversary, completing the kill chain from their perspective. So from all of this, how and whether to utilize a piece of intelligence can be decided, but only once all of this information is complete. So first of all, the nature of the threat. Why do we care about this? Well, first of all, when you're looking at CTI, it's very easy to convolute, the targeted malicious campaigns with the broad-based threats that everyone who has a internet routable IP address faces. And the two of those, generally, we perceive that as two different threat landscapes with two different treatments for network defense, right? Because you can leverage the economies of analytical scale when you're talking about broad-based threats. There's a lot of people working on this. There's a lot of different engagement opportunities for you, and furthermore, your infrastructure, your more classic infrastructure security components like antivirus and all of that are going to offer you, a better level of defense. However, if it's an advanced persistent threat or something of that nature, then of course, the whole intelligence-driven computer network defense paradigm, I think, comes into play, and that's exactly what we designed that methodology around. So, of course, we need to understand how to respond to this and what course of action we're going to take with this piece of intelligence. And, of course, you don't want to apply the entire intelligence-driven network defense treatment to something that might be, a commodity piece of malicious code that isn't intent on stealing your proprietary information or something of that nature, right? So the second is, in terms of nature, is what is the threat actor, campaign, or group? So this helps you link activity that you see that matches a given indicator to other activity and other indicators that you may already have or that you may get in the future. It helps you separate things out and say, okay, I can align this set of indicators with these behaviors, and I know that we're fairly well defended against this particular group or this particular campaign, or they're historically not very good at penetrating our network, whereas this other one over here is historically very good at penetrating our network, and maybe we need to focus on that a lot more, right? And if it's APT, of course, what's the targeting? So is this a group that is targeting you or your industry? Of course, the possibility always exists that if it isn't today, if targeting you today, it might be tomorrow. However, if that may play a part in how you prioritize all of this incoming cyber threat intel and how you triage it. So you may want to triage the things that you care, that you have been known to target you more with a higher priority than that which maybe targets a different industry or something of that nature. Second, the second piece of knowledge here that we talk about is meaning of matching activity. So what are we talking about? What are we describing with an IP address, with an email address, with an MD5 hash, right? MD5 hash is a great example because you could be talking about anything from a Trojanized document to an embedded document to a dropper, to a backdoor, to who knows. Sometimes you even see keylogger files, MD5 hashes come through, which of course aren't going to do you any good. It was mistakenly included in a cyber threat intel feed because of course every time a new key is logged, that hash changes, right? So you want to understand the diamond model classification of this. Is this an indicator of an adversary? Is it an indicator of a target, right? So where is it coming from? Where is it going to? Is it a tool that the adversary, is it indicative of a tool that an adversary is using? Or is it indicative of a technique that an adversary tends to follow? And then of course the kill chain phase. So where along the intrusion does this indicator tell you that the adversary is currently operating, right? From recon all the way to actions on objectives. Third, viability. So viability is a detection or a correlation. What's the false positive rate if you were to use this particular indicator as a detector by itself? Could you use it with other indicators to decrease that false positive rate and still utilize it for detection? Or maybe it isn't good for detection, but it is good for correlation. So, I think email domain, a sending email domain of gmail.com isn't going to be very good as a detection. Probably not alone, or certainly not alone, probably not amplified with other indicators in a complex conditional sort of way. But as a correlation, you can say, well, this is Gmail, and these groups over here have never used Gmail before. This group over here, these two groups over here have. Perhaps the activity that I'm looking at is one of these two other groups, and we can focus more closely and look for some of the key indicators for those campaigns rather than these others. So it helps you focus your response. That's not to say that you should preclude anything, of course, right? So fourth, optimal deployment. This is going to kind of segue into the next section, but there are two aspects of this. What are available courses of action for you to take with an indicator when you observe it, within your visible spectrum, right? So can you block? Can you prevent it in some way? Can you manipulate the activity? Can you, in some way, better your position to stop the adversary from progressing to the next stage of the kill chain, and therefore defend your network? And what technologies are available to utilize that, right? Or I guess accomplish that. And second is, of course, the intel gain-loss equation. So what occurs when you take an action given an indicator? And are there trade-offs? Are there a couple of different options that you have available to you, one of which might be superior? So I'll dig into that a little bit more here. In particular, we'll talk about the courses of action first. So the courses of action matrix is a key component of the whole intelligence-driven computer network defense paradigm. Defenders must understand what technologies are available, what options are available, and how cyber threat intelligence can be deployed within an organization. This sometimes is an extremely complicated thing to understand when you have all sorts of perimeter devices or all sorts of control devices. You've got on your network, you have everything from routers to firewalls to IPSs to proxy servers to DNS servers. All of this is routing or responsible for moving data around, right? And all of them can be used potentially to influence communication with an adversary, or whether inbound, outbound, or at any stage of the kill chain, many stages of the kill chain. And then, of course, there's the host controls that you might have, HIPs and all of that. And I list here a few examples of things that I've seen people, techniques I've seen people employ in the past for various courses of action, various stages of the kill chain. So reconnaissance, as a deception practice, you could potentially provide a baited website for an adversary who might be coming in, pulling down a website, and then they want to maybe Trojanize it, turn it into a PDF, Trojanize it, send it in. Or one of my favorite examples, in the past we saw an adversary routinely pull down our quarterly reports, Trojanize it, and then send it back. Well, if we could bait the website so that each PDF that is provided is dynamically created and maybe has some sort of key value in it that helps us understand who pulled it down when, etc., then that's a deception technique, or provide maybe even a different PDF. Sorry, I was giving the wrong example there. Provide a different PDF conditionally based on who the individual is that's pulling it down, right? So if I know my adversary tends to perform reconnaissance for a set of IP addresses, then I can say maybe, well, I'm going to give them a different PDF, a different quarterly report that's going to have some sort of a unique value in it that I can then instrument my network for, so that when it comes in, I see it. Of course, for weaponization, there's metadata within the various Trojanized documents that we see. So adversaries, just like us, have their habits of using different tools and things like that, and that includes the tools that they use to Trojanize documents. Sometimes those that process of Trojanization, of weaponization, as we say, leaves footprints, and you can look for those footprints. Now, of course, the detection occurs at the delivery phase as a network defender, but what you're actually seeing is the weaponization stage. So for delivery, of course, if you have an email that's coming in, you could either block so you have denial here, block the IP address, or you could intercept the email based on some characteristic of it. When I say block the IP address, of course, I mean the relay IP, provided that that relay IP is uniquely tied to a group of adversaries. So for the exploit stage and on the detect side, if you have a JavaScript emulator that you can, within which you can emulate JavaScript as a detection capability, looking for certain function calls, things of this nature, even if the JavaScript might be obfuscated as it transmits across the wire, if you pull all that stuff out and you can emulate it and look for certain behaviors, then that gives you the ability to detect, right? And so on and so forth. I think you see kind of where I'm going with this. I do want to add one more clever one that I've seen in the past for actions on objectives or actions on intent down there at the bottom for disruption. One of the things that I think is very clever that I've seen organizations do is, we have this problem with FTP exfiltration. Maybe we can't block all FTP outbound just simply as a matter of business continuity and things of that nature. Well, maybe what we can do is throttle it, so that if you have gigabytes or terabytes of data that you're trying to exfiltrate, it's going to take you a really long time. What that does is it extends that timeline, because what you're talking about is a race condition. Who can identify whom and stop it can the network defenders identify the adversaries before the adversaries get all the data that they want, right? So in terms of FTP throttling, they might be getting some data that might be bad, but if you can throttle that, slow them down, it increases the chances of your network defenders seeing it and having an opportunity to respond, cut it off, and prevent further damage. And then, of course, HIPS rules for detection of maybe various tools that are used. PSExec, if your network admins don't use that, those sorts of things can be detection and even denial, depending on again your network conditions, options for you in actions on intent. So, all right, beat that slide to death, didn't I? Moving on, so that's understanding what your courses of action are and understanding the technologies that are available. Now, which one is going to be your best option? Here we have an example from the previous slide. In the delivery stage, let's say you have a relay IP address that is favorably used by an adversary, and it does there's no legitimate business email going through it. Well, of course you could block that IP address at your firewall, right? And that would prevent the email from coming in. Now, if you do that, however, the adversary, first of all, is going to know that the email didn't make it in. So that kind of tips your hand of what intelligence you might have to the adversary. And second of all, there's no specimen to analyze. There's nothing, right? That terminates, that's the beginning and the end of your incident response process. And yeah, you blocked it, but hey, if you could maybe collect it, right? If you could redirect email from that email relay to a quarantine for your incident responders to take a look at it, and then your incident responders are able to, pull out indicators. Maybe a new email address was used to send the email. Maybe a new backdoor was included in a Trojanized document. Well, then guess what? You've got all this additional intelligence. You're completing the kill chain. Whereas with simply blocking the IP address, you aren't able to complete the kill chain. You just know we had a detection at stage 3 and game over. We can say we had a detection at stage 3 and game over, but hey, we also now know all of these other things about what this intrusion would have looked like had it been successful, had we not have been lucky and they reused their email infrastructure or email relay. So that's the intel gain-loss trade-off that needs to be understood when determining how to deploy cyber threat intel indicators. And this goes for every stage, every type of indicator, every stage of the kill chain. A lot of times there, in some cases there may not be a degrade option or a disrupt option, but there are a lot of options, and categorically. And the technologies should be available to network defenders to maximize the number of options for deploying this cyber threat intelligence. And if there are gaps in this, then those are opportunities for future investment to improve the network defense of your organization. So to maximize the use of cyber threat intelligence, all of the context that we just talked about here should be understood. And when it's not, it can be implied, it can be derived sometimes. However, this adds overhead of digesting cyber threat intelligence. If you're getting a lot of intel feed coming in, and I know there are a lot of organizations that are struggling with this right now. How do you try to provide this necessary context to make these smart decisions about using threat intel? How do you scale this? Well, I've seen that what this is doing is driving various tools to automatically process intelligence. For example, easy example is I get an IP address that I know is command and control. Well, maybe that's all I know about it. How can I determine if this is even a good indicator for detection? Well, easy enough. If I have all of my NetFlow data available, let's say, I can go back and search through my NetFlow data and see if I have any communication with it. And if not, well then, hey, it's probably going to be good for detection. I don't see it. It's not associated with any business purpose, right? At the very least, we can detect on it when we see it. Now, of course, if you do a search and you get a whole bunch of activity, then that, of course, means additional information is going to be necessary, and then your analysts need to be able to get access to that additional information. Okay, is this port 80? All right, it's HTTP. Do I have proxy logs, et cetera, et cetera? The best CTI maximizes the context of these 4 different aspects right here. There we go. Of these 4 different areas of knowledge, the best CTI maximizes the population of this so that the barrier for entry, the barrier for use, is as low as possible, and the recipient of that intelligence can effectively deploy it. So, and then there's some context which may be automatically inferred, and that's kind of what I was just referring to. So, here's an example of bad cyber threat intelligence. So we have 2 email addresses, an IP address. Let's pretend that's a publicly routable IP address. I just didn't want to make anybody guilty here. And a string that says Adobe Updater. I don't know what this means. Nobody knows what this means. Well, I know what it's going to mean because I wrote the slides. But if I was a recipient, an otherwise naive recipient of this cyber threat intel, I don't know this is not useful at all. I can search through my email logs and see if I have any joe@sans.org or mike@cloppert.org. If I don't see either of those things, maybe I can deploy a detection so that when I do, I can look further. But even then, what am I looking for when I see it? Slightly better. joe@sans.org is a victim address. So, now we're talking a little bit diamond model. Delivery stage, kill chain 3 indicator, right? So kill chain again. Mike@cloppert.org, maybe that's adversary infrastructure for C2. So we've got SMTP C2, it's happened before. 10.1.1.3, maybe that's adversary infrastructure for FTP exfil, and there's a typo on this slide, I apologize, it's actually kill chain stage 7. That's what happens when you put slides together and it's too late. And Adobe Updater, maybe now this is a TTP or a tool artifact. It's a installation indicator in stage 5. It's a Windows run key name for persistence mechanism of a backdoor. That's better. But what else could be in here? Do all of these associate with one another? Maybe. I would assume so since I got them all at the same time. Oh, no, they don't. Oh, well, this happens a lot when you're trying to digest, in particular, reported to us cyber threat intel. And now this is really, as a side note, this is really where the distinction between detected by us and reported to us has great meaning. You have all of the context of the indicators of the cyber threat intelligence that you've generated yourself. That is the most valuable intelligence you're going to have for a couple of reasons. First of all, you have all of this context. You understand it. You are the authority for that intelligence. Second of all, you also know that this is something that has at the very least hit you before. Whether or not it's APT, don't know, you know, you can't maybe make a blanket statement about it, but at the very least, you know that it affects your organization. Reported to us, the external intelligence, you just don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but until you have this level of detail that we see in this slide, where we have campaigns listed, and we know, you know, maybe that indicators, intelligence matching a particular campaign, we've seen in intrusions before. Until you have that knowledge, you can't be sure. Now, of course, sure, you can try to detect everything, and you can try to respond to everything, but sometimes, and in particular in organizations that don't have a huge machine around, you know, built around cyber threat intelligence, that's not really feasible. So you need to have a way of prioritizing, right? And this context that you see in this slide is pretty close to what you would ideally want for each piece of intelligence that you get. So now, when we're deploying this technology, how do we field it, right? How do we, you know, everybody has their own different term: exploit it, field it, utilize it, right? A lot of security vendors that we all know and love offer solutions, right? We don't want a solution. We want a framework. We want a framework that provides a rich syntactic language that is flexible and scalable, that allows us to articulate, to codify behaviors and specific pieces of cyber threat intelligence in a way that maximizes the number of different actions that we can take on it, right? We want to marry our technology to these 4 different pieces of knowledge and this understanding of, you know, cyber threat intelligence that we, in an ideal circumstance, have, right? And so there's an easy litmus test to see if a technology is likely a solution or a framework, if it's likely going to play well with cyber threat intelligence or not. The first is, how syntactically robust is the rule language, right? How descriptive can I be about an event, about some activity, about a net flow, about, you know, some packet data, about some system activity? How descriptive can I be when I describe it myself, when I'm building these detections myself? And the second is, are the rules that are provided by the vendor considered proprietary? If you have a rich syntactic language that allows you to apply semantic meaning to some sort of activity, and the rules that are provided by the vendor are not considered proprietary, then that's probably going to be a good framework for you know, fielding or utilizing your indicators and your cyber threat intelligence. So, and then, you know, what are the actions that that technology can take in your IDS or IPS? Is your IDS in line, or is, which I guess would infer IPS, right? What about your SIM, right? Maybe your SIM is only good for detection. Maybe you can't take any corrective action with your SIM. Well, maybe that's an opportunity for improvement, or something for you to consider if you need to replace it. What about your endpoint solution? HIPS, antivirus, things of that nature. You know, what does the litmus test look like at your organization? What are the limitations? So how far will this scale? At CIRT, we have tens of thousands of cyber threat intel indicators, right? So can you build? If the only way for you to field detection for an IP address in the command and control stage is for you to build an IDS rule, then are you going to be able to build an IDS rule that can take you know, one of 10,000 different IP addresses within it, or can you build 10,000 different IDS rules? No, probably not, right? So you need to figure out how these indicators, the cyber threat intel, can be scaled with the tools that you have. And if you don't have those tools, then you need to see how you can go about getting them, or suffer the consequences of having a less than optimal course of action that gets selected simply because of the technological limitations apparent at your, or at, you know, exigent at your company. So talk about the 2014 Cyber Threat Intel Summit. I'm so excited that I just can't hide it. I'm about to lose control, and I think I like it. I am really, really excited about some of our presentation, about all of our presenters. Some of them random order and randomly selected I've listed here. Really looking forward to Chris Betts. I've got a lot of old colleagues of mine that are talking at this conference, and you know, that was the approach that I took last year with the first CTI Summit. The results, the feedback about the presenters and their content and their style was overwhelmingly positive. So I said, you know, let's not break a good thing. So me and Rob Lee and John Pescatore have just found our old war buddies, and we're getting the band back together. So the the SANS 360 is looking really good. We've got an introduction to the Diamond model, finally. I'm so happy about that. We have Agile Defensive Technologies by U.S. Marine Corps Red Team Captain Johnston. We have a presentation on CTI and incident response. I'm really looking forward to that. More robust kill chain stage 5 capabilities with file artifacts. That's one of the harder stages of the kill chain to really find good detections in. So that's going to be very helpful, I think, to attendees. Rich Barger, the tallest man in information security, is talking, as is Andre Ludwig, the angriest man in InfoSec. We call him Dre. There's SANS training and more to come. So the details there are Sheraton Crystal City Hotel, February 4th to 11th. Early registration, $300 is until the 22nd. I don't think it's the 22nd yet, right? Right, good, 5 days. All right, and I think that's it. So I will be more than happy to take any questions, and if it's a public question, then I'll go ahead and just answer it verbally here. And I'm not seeing any, Ben, unless I'm misusing the webinar again.
Nope, we don't have any questions yet. We have a couple minutes here, though, so if anyone would like to ask a question, please feel free to type that right into the chat window.
Rick, how you doing? All right. What advice do you have for smaller shops that don't have resources for staff and robust tools? That is a fantastic question. So you have to start somewhere, right? And where I would start is, you know, if you haven't had an APT incident at your organization, but you're concerned about it, I would say your first step is going to be industry trade groups, right? Any of the ISACs, you know, if you're part of a large industry these days, particularly, pardon me, if it is one of the you know, critical sectors for the United States, then there's a information sharing exchange that you can participate in. Everybody always starts as a listener, right? Everybody always starts small, and you can ask the folks at that information exchange, hey, of all the stuff you know about, what's the stuff that I should be most concerned about? Either the most, you know, the ones with the highest impact, or the ones that I will see with the highest frequency. Start there, get the indicators and the intelligence associated with those campaigns, and begin looking for that in a very, I guess, surgical fashion within your organization. Because, you know, you need to, it'll start as a manual process, right? Oh man, now I got to go look through firewall logs. Oh man, now I got to go look through these logs. Go look through those logs. So, you know, start small and start with the stuff that's the most likely to show you some sort of problem on your network, right? Or the worst type of problem on your network. And if you've had an APT incident in the past, start with that data. Start with that data, pull threads. Look for missing holes in the kill chain from analysis you've done in the past. Robust your you know, detected bias intelligence corpus, and build it out from there. And I think what you'll find is that the tools and the investment from your management will grow as they begin to understand the impact, as you begin to grow your capability to detect it. And are you developing a course in CTI? Rob Lee. Yes, Rob, we are. thank you for asking. The authors are myself, and primarily myself, and one of the developers of the Diamond model. We call him CIRT, and we're hoping to get it done this year. So, what is your take regarding using rule frameworks such as taxi sticks and use of interoperability efforts such as OpenIOC? Very good question. So, sticks and taxi. All right. The whole discussion about what is the right framework or standard or what have you for sharing cyber threat intel is one that I've kind of tried to stay away from. Really, what matters is that everybody uses the same thing and uses it in the same way, right? So if CSV is the accepted standard, and those fields are defined and everyone uses them the same way, it's effectively going to be the same impact to me in my organization as something like sticks or taxi. Now, of course, that's a little bit of an extreme example. One of my concerns with sticks is that it is so complex that it leaves open a lot of opportunity for people to vary their interpretation of when they should use which, when they should bucketize an indicator as one type of attribute or another, or what the attribute value should be, things of that nature. It introduces ambiguity. I'm really concerned about it. I'm very excited, though, that some of my colleagues at Lockheed Martin have been involved in the development of this and pushing it from the U.S. government and the FSISAC side. And I think as long as we can get agreement on how we're going to use it, then we're going to have a really powerful tool for cyber threat intel sharing, which also allows for automated, deployment of this data, of this cyber threat intelligence information when we receive it. Now, of course, there are dangers there, right? And the danger is you need to understand all of those four things that I mentioned. Otherwise, there might be a risk of you, I don't know, DNS redirecting one of the root name servers or something like that if you get a bad piece of intelligence. Seen it done. Not kidding. So I think hopefully that answers your question on that. It's a little bit open-ended. Let's see. Almost every vendor out there has now added the buzzword threat intelligence to their products. How can I tell the real deal from snake oil salesman? That's also a good question. Thank you, Rob. I think, I would refer to generally this presentation here. So what of the pieces of context that you need about a given indicator, a given piece of cyber intel that you're getting from one of these vendors, is available? Do they provide all of it? How often do they provide all of it? Is it all the time? Is it rarely? That sort of a thing. And then, on top of that, what is, if you're able to ascertain it, what is the source of their intelligence in the first place, right? How do they vet it? How do they amplify it? How do they endow it with these contextual pieces of information that you're going to need to utilize it properly in your organization? If it's just a stream of indicator values like I showed with my bad intel example slide, then that's probably not going to be something that is useful to you. Now, and then from the tool side, so that's from a intel feed side. From the tool side, if the tool, again, provides that framework to deploy threat intelligence, rather than just a solution that quote, uses threat intelligence to detect the APTs, then, that's going to be something that's probably not going to provide you any value. So, I would say, and that's really what the focus I wanted to be of this presentation, is so that you understand, what you need, how you're going to get your arms around this, identify the stuff you can use, and then go ahead and deploy it to aid your computer network defense organization. So, good questions. Thank you. Oh, one more. Rick, what types of intel analysis platforms do you see out there? The not Palantir's I2s of the world, too expensive. You know, this is a good question. However, I don't feel that I'm going to be able to give a fair response to this question. You know, some of the the Palantirs and the I2s are very valuable. There's Maltego, but I know you also you know, have to pay to use it. And you know, of course, you can go all the way down to, you know, coding your own stuff. But unfortunately, I don't, Rick, I don't have a good recommendation for you that I can provide, I think, in good conscience, without it being a little bit too biased, because of the experience that I've had in that area. I would love, frankly, and you know, maybe this is something that we can work out next for the next SANS CTI summit. You know, it'd be interesting to have a bake-off or a you know, comparison, some sort of a panel on intel analysis platforms like that. So good, very good question, Rick. I apologize, I can't really give a better answer to it. Okay, any other questions? From an attacker perspective, from Rob, can you talk to some of the more interesting adversary capability progression that has happened recently? Has the Mandiant APT-1 report changed this? I'm going to have to go ahead and say I'm going to give a very not very helpful, vague response, because a lot, unfortunately, I have a bit of guilty knowledge that I'm not at liberty to discuss in a lot of those cases. But you know, I will say that the Mandiant APT-1 report was a huge deal. It was a huge deal for from a public policy perspective. It was a huge deal from the perspective of our adversaries. It did, in fact, change the behaviors of the adversaries, in particular those discussed in the report. I think what we have seen, at least in the last year or two, and I don't know if this, I don't necessarily attribute this to the APT-1 report, but there's definitely a more and more the adversaries that we see are paying closer attention to their own tradecraft than they had in the past. You know, in the past it was very sloppy and disorganized, and increasingly we're seeing groups that weren't as, you know, well organized or as careful in the past become more so, and more new campaigns arise which exhibit some of those characteristics of a more carefully crafted operation. And you know, I'd like to go into more detail than that, but I unfortunately can't. And any evidence of anti-forensics? Yes, some. So you know, the whole best practices in you know, keeping your analysis on a separate computer or network that is at the very least you know, logically separated, if not preferably air-gapped, you know, from your the systems that you captured, you know, you observed it on. That's really important in the event that this does occur. I have seen, I think there have been a couple of in-case exploits recently in the last year or two, as well as, you know, of course, the usual constant, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, battle of attrition between the analysts and the adversaries in terms of identifying virtual machines and things of that nature. But those sorts of anti-forensic techniques that identify VMs and then alter the behavior or halt the behavior altogether, I'm expecting we're going to see those on the decline. I think those techniques really aren't going to be around for a whole lot longer because of the widespread use of virtualization at enterprise scale. So suddenly you've got adversaries that are deploying these, pieces of code that will not execute in a virtual machine because the assumption is it's an analyst machine, when in fact it's an enterprise system. Now, of course, there are ways around that, and so on and so forth. The spy versus spy game goes on, but I think the primary anti-forensic techniques that I've seen have been around VM awareness. So we've got 156. I think we're looking good. I appreciate everybody hanging on here for the Q&A. I appreciate your interest, and hope to see you at the second annual SANS CTI Summit coming up in February. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mike. And thank you for taking time out of your day to present this to us. We really appreciate it. To our audience, thank you for listening in. For a schedule of upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, go to sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.